The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today our panel will once again be answering questions from our listeners. Today's question is from Peter, and Peter lives in Los Angeles, California. And Peter asks, the other day someone, reportedly the Israelis, caused a mass detonation of pagers believed to be used by members of Hezbollah. As this is rather random, does the panel believe this is ethical? That's question one. What does the panel believe might be the response to these actions? And questions 3 and 4, does the panel think that the United States was aware of the plan? And do you believe this is something the U.S. government would condone? So I can repeat these if you like.
No, I don't think you need to repeat them. I mean, thousands of pagers blowing up in people's pockets. Unfortunately, a child died. I'm not exactly sure what happened there. But this is obviously more ethical than dropping bombs. And, you know, this is warfare done in an extremely innovative and highly targeted way. I don't see any ethical issues with it at all.
No, I mean, first of all, today I just actually saw that some of the handheld radios also started blowing up. So this is something, and I'm not sure if Israel has actually taken responsibility for this.
They do not do that, and they never will. They will never do that.
Yeah, I mean, this is not something. But if the assumption is that it was Israel, this is pretty technologically savvy, because somebody was saying, well, they disrupted the cell phone, so everybody went to pagers. Okay, but everybody didn't go to the same pager. To be able to make this work probably is from a software standpoint of some sort, I would assume. Again, not being technically, up on any of this. I can't see it being a hardware thing, unless these were all the same kind of pagers, all sold by the same person who was involved in this. I mean, it'd be massively complex to get that. So maybe it was a software thing that they did. And if it is a software thing, I think this is a tale for everybody that has a cell phone. If you can do it with a pager, why can't you do it with a cell phone? And is this a potential new form of warfare? And I think that's very, very concerning when you consider that the majority of the population carries a cell phone. So it'll be interesting to find out, if we ever do find out, how this was accomplished and what it might mean, to technology going forward. Did the U.S. know? If they did, they're not going to admit up to it, just like Israel isn't going to admit up to the fact they did it. Is it ethical? I can see Scott's point about the fact of it's better than dropping bombs on people. Yep, got that. Are there going to be innocent people killed in an action like this? Absolutely. As Scott pointed out, a child was killed. But then again, if you're dropping bombs, probably the devastation is even worse, and it's equally as indiscriminate. It is warfare. You try to, reduce the number of potential civilian casualties and those non-combatants. Is this something that might come before the International Criminal Court? It could. It very well could. And maybe if it does, and I'm not saying that it will, if it does, we may start seeing the answers there.
The things that we know so far, first of all, Hezbollah has not been using cell phones for some time now, years actually, because they knew the Israelis could intercept their cell phones. So they went to pagers, and I'm not sure what it says on the page, but I've seen the wire on HBO, and I know that there's a lot of different ways that you can use these things to send messages to people. The messages are coded, and they know what the code is. So those are things that we know. We also know that a Taiwanese company manufactures these pagers, but these particular ones that were used in this attack actually come from a subsidiary of theirs that's based in Hungary. And the Hungarian government has tried to distance itself from this attack, saying that they had no idea that the Israelis had hidden tiny explosives in these pagers after they were manufactured, before they were packaged and bought by Hezbollah to distribute to their troops, and had some kind of nanotechnology triggering device that went off. It's also thought that Israel had not actually planned to do this, but that they had gotten some word that these pagers were due to be recycled or replaced somehow, and they figured they better use them now. It's an amazing technological feat. We've seen it before from Israel. It's really what they're best at, whether it's sending centrifuges off the wall in Iran when they put that Stuxnet worm into the software that invaded the nuclear plants in Iran and sent the centrifuges spinning out of control and destroyed. Whether it's sneaking a bomb into Tehran and putting it in the head of Hamas's house or apartment where he was staying, and detonating that from afar. Apparently, they're really good at what they do. This is what they do best. I would much prefer, from a ethical standpoint, them fighting this kind of warfare than the kind that just drops bombs on people. So, I know that there were a lot of explosions in Beirut today as cell phones, laptops, and walkie-talkies and other devices are blowing up. I think everybody in general is better off when there's targeting rather than indiscriminate violence. I am sorry that a 9-year-old girl, Fatima Abdullah, was killed in this attack. It's tragic and sad, but many of the people who were killed, and I think only 12 people were killed, although that may rise as the wounded succumb to their wounds. But 300 people got injured. It's something. It's really quite amazing. And Israel will never take responsibility for it because they don't do that. But I don't think anybody else could have pulled this off. I'm pretty sure we couldn't have done it. So their advanced capabilities are really quite amazing.
How much do you think this might contribute to escalation and widening the war and so forth? And are we getting farther away from a potential peace initiative?
Well, Sinwar, who's now the head of Hamas, has basically said that he's looking forward to a long war in Gaza. So there's not going to be any kind of cessation of hostilities there. Obviously, we saw the Houthis shooting a hypersonic missile at Israel that landed and reportedly didn't do a whole lot of damage, but they've proved that they have that capability, which is amazing in one of the most starving countries in the world, that they have that capability. And I don't see this ending anytime soon. I wish it would. Obviously, I think it's a terrible tragedy for everybody involved and the rest of the world, but I don't see it ending anytime soon. And it would have been a lovely October surprise to end this war for the White House and its other, the vice president running for president now. But I don't think it's going to happen. So it's going to go on.
I totally agree with that. There really is much I can add to that. It is going to continue until somebody capitulates. And that's really all it comes down to. Somebody's got to capitulate. There's not going to be an October surprise. People do have to realize, and we've said this before on this podcast, there is only so much the United States can do without getting directly involved into it. And nobody wants that. So if there's something that we can hang on the positive side of the administration today, is that we are not directly involved in it. just as we're not directly involved in Ukraine, keeping us out. There's a lot of people calling for us to be involved. Surprisingly, it's a bunch of old politicians who have no skin in the game, and their family won't be put into harm's way. This is something that really the people, if they were looking at it, have got to understand that the United States cannot do much more than what we're doing right now. We hope for a solution, but will this escalate? Probably. We have to now sit back and wait for see who makes the next move and what that next move is going to be.
And what effect do you think this might have, the continuation on the election, and what happens if Trump winds up in the White House?
I don't think it's going to have an effect on the election because foreign policy really is not a major concern of the American electorate. It's not a kitchen table issue. So I don't think it's going to have a great impact. And I really do think, unlike how our government works, and unlike the economy and people's understanding of it, I think a lot of people do understand that there's only so much without direct involvement, boots on the ground, that the United States can actually do. I think that there's a reality there that people do understand. So I don't think it's going to impact. I don't think it's going to impact at all. When Trump gets in, who knows? I can guarantee you that he's not going to sit down with Hezbollah and Hamas and Israel and in an hour work out the perfect deal. That ain't going to happen. I mean, that I can guarantee. And very rarely can I guarantee 100%, but that's something that definitely you can guarantee. That would not happen. So what would his impact be? I don't think very much. Who knows what his policy would be? Maybe he has a concept of a policy. I'm really not sure.
I agree with Mark on that. There's, first of all, I think the American people are generally pro-Israel. I know that there's a lot of college students out there who are not, and I think probably the three of us are very familiar with that, being college professors, and we see, that there's a generational divide when it comes to Israel. Anybody who grew up in the 60s and 70s understands what Israel has gone through and remembers when they were the David and not the Goliath. So I think we have a different way of looking at things than young people do. But I don't think it's a major issue for young people one way or another. I think it was like number 20 on a list of 21 items that people were looking at. As far as the elections, the bigger question to me is, what if Harris gets in? And hopefully that does happen, because I think she'll be more sane than Trump is. And that the question that I have is, does she have her own people, or will there be continuity? Will Anthony Blinken keep his job? Will he be the Secretary of State? Or does she have other people in mind already to take over that role? And how effective are they going to be in trying to broker a deal? Because one thing you can say about Blinken is that he's been active. I mean, he's not one of these guys who's sitting back. He's there all the time. He's in Egypt today, may even be elsewhere, and may even be in Qatar later today. So he's moving around. He's negotiating this out. He's trying to get the combatants to stop combating. And I think that that's a good thing. But I don't know that Kamala Harris necessarily looks at him and says, this guy's really effective, I need to keep him on board, or whether she's got her own people that are going to give it a try. One way or another, there's going to be some kind of shift in the way that we manage this. I think Kamala Harris, being a little bit younger than Joe Biden, probably doesn't have the fervently pro-Israel stand that he does and did, but I think that there'll be some measure of continuity there.
Yeah. I mean, we've said on this podcast, I think that Pete Buttigieg would make a great Secretary of State. And it is very possible that Blinken stays on as the special envoy and the special representative to this conflict. I mean, that's always a possibility too. So that continuity is maintained. You see, again, Scott's correct. You see Blinken dealing more with the Israeli conflict than you do with the Ukraine conflict. So, it would make sense to me to pick somebody like a Pete Buttigieg, make him the Secretary of State, and say, okay, you've got Ukraine and the rest of the Secretary of State duties. Blinken, you're our special envoy to Israel, and we're going to let you continue what you've been doing with the full authority that you've always had. And I'm sure that Buttigieg, being a smart man, would not question it, because I'm sure he understands how instrumental Blinken's approach to this has been, even though that it has not had the results that people would like to see. But I think that everybody fully understands that Blinken has done a great job. He has been engaged. He's done a great job. As Scott says, he's been there constantly, and just being a presence. And I think that if they understand that Blinken still has the authority to act, I think that you maintain the continuity. That's if Blinken would be willing to stay. I mean, let's face it, after 4 years of this, Blinken might say, you know what, I think it's about time to go to the beach and just never be bothered with stuff like this again. I mean, that's very possible too. I remember when he was first appointed, he didn't have a gray hair in his head, if I remember correctly. Well, guess what? 4 years of being the Secretary of State with all these things going on, it'll take its toll upon you.
Yeah, great. And thank you so much for both of your perspectives, and thank you to our listeners for your questions. Thank you to Peter from Los Angeles for your question. And we'll see you again on the Nova Society.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. The JCIS is a publication of Nova Works, a scholarly depository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, who is our editing partner, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. We'd also like to thank iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd also like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.